I realize we haven't talked a ton about puppetry necessarily, which is fine. Well, I think, like I said, I think this is great.
Well, this is the stuff you need to know before you get to do the puppetry.
Well, that's
So I think
that's the
just
thing
as
though too,
important.
is that I've tried to point this out to people. There are some amazingly talented folks that I know that are horrible at auditioning, and it sucks because really talented people that I know would do fantastic work if given the opportunity, but they can't get out of their own heads enough to show that to people. So.
Welcome back to Puppeteers. We're your hosts, Adam Kreutinger.
and Cameron Garrity.
And today we have Tyler Bunch on the show. Welcome to the show, Tyler.
Thanks, guys. It's awesome to be here. Bloom.
It's wonderful to have you.
Yeah, so if for anybody who doesn't know, Tyler has been a main part of the puppet world for quite some time now. You know him from Sesame Street, from all sorts of Henson projects. He was a part of Puppet Up, or Stuffed and Unstrung, as it was often known as well. Is just a wonderful teacher and mentor, and just all-around person, and we're really excited to have him here and to talk to him. So, Tyler Bunch, welcome to Puppeteers.
Thank you very much. It's not often I get introduced as an all-around person. I'm glad to finally be in the fleshy category.
You definitely are. So, is there anything you're working on right now that you can talk about?
Right now,
Any projects going on?
I've just finished last week. Very small voice on a internet campaign for Got Milk.
Nice.
That, make your bones strong, kids. And then there's been on and off things. Sesame Street has been doing more corporate co-sponsorships. So we've been doing some things for different entities that have brought funds to the table for Sesame, very sporadic here and there. And then gearing up to very soon start Marty Robinson's Halloween musical project on the Lower East Side in the city. Actually, both my wife, Margaret, and I will be part of his musical Halloween comedy horror extravaganza, All Hallows Eve. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, that's going to be such a great show. I'm hoping to be able to get down there.
How many people are part of that production?
The cast may have grown since last time I saw any semblance of like a call sheet or anything, because he's wanted to increase the chorus size and get more of the environment alive with some of his puppet creations. It's one of those immersive walking shows. So as an audience member, you come into a space and then the show takes you into a new space, and then the new space, he may have described this to you in an earlier episode. But because he wants the environment to really be alive for the audience, I think there may be some more hands involved. Long-winded answer to, I believe there's 12 of us now.
Okay. Oh, great.
I think, but I may be overestimating. I'd have to look at the list.
No, it's okay.
And you're working is it the pumpkin character that you're working a lot on?
Technically, my role is two characters. We open in the real world. Two kids kind of reluctantly realizing that this is maybe their last trick-or-treating Halloween, so they decide to make the most of it. So I'm first their dad, with some silliness, and then once they get into this sort of Hansel and Gretel-esque experience with a very nasty witch, demonic, powerful entity that lives on human souls, or at least on human fear. She draws kids into her home. I'm kind of like her henchman, who is, walking pumpkin head on a skeleton body, who, as his impact on the story grows, he literally grows. So he starts at about 18 inches tall, and by the end, he's 20 feet tall.
That's
really cool.
I was fortunate enough to work on it when he first did it at the O'Neill, and to see it having grown over the years, and it looks like it's going to be a really powerful piece. And I know Marty's kind of had it in his head for a really long time, so
Which is already a scary place to be. So
Yes. I can imagine. Oh wow! And your wife is in it as well. What is she doing in it?
My wife is a very talented actress, singer, dancer. She also does visual art. I don't know if I'd show you this. She, when Louis, Elmo's father, started becoming a little more popular on the show, she made me this shirt. So it's hand painted.
Great.
Oh, that's
hand-painted Louie.
amazing. Yeah.
But in this show, she'll be singing, dancing, and some of the more dance-esque puppetry elements, more than likely. So
Over the years of all the productions you've been involved with, have you had many opportunities to perform together like that?
this will only be, I'm gonna say, the fourth time we've done small productions. And I got her an audition. Did not get her the job, but I got her an audition for the Disney Jason Segel Muppets movie, their first
Oh, nice.
movie. So she's one of the dancers in the finale. She's right there in front of the camera, dressed as a cater waiter.
Oh, really?
Oh, cool.
Oh my gosh, that's so
We'll
cool.
have to
Yeah.
go back and look at that.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
neat.
yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. Wow, I had no idea.
Matter of fact,
Great.
she was pissed off because the second movie in their line picks up at that same spot. They actually hired an extra that looked like her to play her from the first movie instead of just.
She's like, I'm
was a little pissed
available.
off.
I'm available.
Where do you need me? I'll be there in 10 minutes.
That's so funny.
A
That's
professional
great.
named Marka Lee, if anyone's looking to hire a very talented singer, actor, dancer. She's quite the tap dancer, too. Anyway.
And her website is right at the bottom of your screen right now. So the commercials that you were talking about that Sesame is doing, that's similar, like in the same kind of vein of what they do, Chevy commercials a couple years ago.
The Chrysler Pacifica.
Oh, Chrysler.
Yes. Yes. So there's been some more corporate co-sponsorships like that. Less I think they're maneuvering this fine line, and I'm speaking outside of the company's actual rhetoric, so I don't want to completely misspeak, but the notion that the characters are there in support of some sort of educational or moving humanity forward idea that happens to also involve a product because the company kind enough to support the endeavor obviously wants the world to know that they've done so. So it's not puppets' faces on the front of a car, but we're helping people get word out. So
Very cool. Yeah, and do you guys foresee, I'm sure maybe October, November will also be a busy time for some of the Sesame Puppeteers, potentially.
There is the current rumor is that we will start shooting season 51 in December, but obviously once season 50 premieres, the notion is that there will be a lot of public demand to kind of reminisce with us and celebrate the life of the show. Much like The Honor, which I'm sure you guys saw, that Sesame will be the first television show ever indoctrinated at the Kennedy Honors.
Yeah, that's a huge honor. That was
Yeah,
incredible.
really
And
big deal.
congratulations on that.
And for those of you who listen to this after that, it was such a great thing to be there on stage with everyone. Sesame producers, hint, hint. Anyway.
Wink, wink.
That's great. That's wonderful. How long have you worked with Sesame Street?
Twofold answer. First one is I first walked on the set in fall of 1993. There to spectate, then came back a few weeks later when they needed a heck of a lot of people for the Slimy to the Moon storyline, where literally WASA, the Worm Aeronautics Base, launched Slimy. And there was a big parade, so they needed lots of hands on deck. And that was kind of my first experience on the show. And then I worked a total of 12 times over the next 4 years when they needed lots and lots of people. But then went off, got my big break, got a little more seasoned, and came back about 15 years ago. And I've been a contract player there for most days of shooting for the last 15 years now.
No, and that really shows just the dedication, and also you don't necessarily just join those ranks overnight. And I think you and I have talked about this, even though you've been there, as you said, most days for the last 15 years, hasn't it even been more recently that you're even like definitely one of the core puppeteers as well?
Well, it's sort
Am I
of. That was-
characterizing that, and I'm maybe saying that wrong.
No, you're not. You're not really. It's just from more of an emotional standpoint as anything else. The the show has gone through such flux in terms of what monies it could allocate to the flagship effort, and where they were coming from, and how many people they could hire, how many shows were going to be made during any given season. There was a point for 13 years ago where we were down to 18 shows, 18 episodic shows in a season. That's down from 130 shows a season, not 12 years before that. So it kept getting smaller and smaller, and the notion of what was required, and, chicken or the egg, there was this new understanding that came that, like, everybody knows how their little kids love to watch the same video over and over again. And we think it's just like, familiarity, like it's the same reason they like to eat the same candy over and over again. And that's like the rudimentary understanding, when actually studies have been done that kids are empowered by having the information that's coming across. So the notion that they watch something and they know what's going to happen, they know more than their favorite character on screen. They know the answer. They can say or guess or anticipate the journey that the character has to make, feeling empowered by that information. So it's the ego of the information that has them watching the same thing over and over again. The comfort and the predictability from a socio-emotional sense and a psychological sense, and just literally feeling smart. So the idea that a preschool age kid or kindergarten age kid needed a new show every day was more about satisfying the adult creative, I don't want to be teaching the kids the same lessons over and over again, outlet than it was serving the children. Now, like I said, chicken, egg, some people kind of wonder if that was a justification for not being able to make as many shows because the money wasn't there. But at the same time, it's been proven that there is a higher absorption rate for these kids who don't get the information in different ways as like this onslaught. The consistency of how the information is translated creates a higher retention level. And when you break that down to its simplest description, that basically means the same lesson or the same story helps them absorb it that much more quickly. So
could you say that whole part again for us so that we could retain
Sure.
that a little?
So what happened? So that was in an answer to your question about, the consistency of our employment. So if you're looking at the product being created in that way, the number of hands that have been necessary has been smaller and smaller, and the diversity of those hands has had to increase, because if we do want to have an offline character, an offshoot character that's just a one-episode character that's kind of helping drive a central character storyline along, as opposed to creating all of these consistent characters. Like if you think about how many characters have been created over the course of Sesame's existence, and the classic characters and the legacy characters that we don't see as much, that we remember seeing these bits from. Like every once in a while, they'd write a bit for blah 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 character, and you would see them. If you think about the last 15 years or so, there have not been that many recurring sideline characters. There haven't been this, create a character and then write sketches for them, because that's not the way the show teaches now. Mm-hmm. So the cast has had to morph into this group of diverse people that are the anchor character set, and then other folks who could play whatever character is needed for a given episode, because it's probably only going to be that episode. So the greater your range as a performer, the more likely that you would stay on board. So during that transition time, we weren't sure who was going to serve the season best, who was going to serve what information is coming along, and therefore who's going to be offered the work. And additionally, there's this, people that you work with vibe, like getting to an ensemble of folks where all the talents complement one another. We all know very talented performers, artists who might kind of work in similar vein. So the notion that these two people who kind of do the same thing, although they're both extremely talented, when the ensemble only really needs one of that type, how do you pick? Like, what do you do? So I don't admire the fact that they had to carve us down to a smaller set, but that's ultimately what happened. So now there's, basically 14 of us who try to do everything the show needs. And occasionally we have to bring in some other folks just because of the number of characters that need to be on screen to satisfy the notion that everybody's popular characters in the frame. But generally speaking, the 14 of us have been required to do all the work necessary, as much from a budgetary standpoint as anything else. They want to, because that's the other thing about union work is they have to, the residuals and what have you. It costs the show a lot more money the more people they employ. It's an
Right.
exponential factor. It's not just a give so-and-so a shot, because then you also have to pay them the residuals when the show keeps recirculating. And this is one of those shows that recirculates a lot. So during that transitional time, there's kind of a nail biting. Are they going to offer me? Am I going to get a season contract this year? Am I going to? So, but again, for the last 4 years, it's the crew has kind of been the same.
Well, and that must make it easier just for everybody, because you're not worried about not only on within the set, but even when you go to places like when you're out in other social circles and you see, Joe Schmo on the street, and you want to maybe say like, oh, hey, are we going to see you this year? And then, oh, maybe we won't.
Right.
Or,
I don't know. Right.
And just, consistency in cases like that, I could see being a benefit just for everybody's, peace of mind.
Definitely.
That's really cool. Would love to go back a little bit to before Sesame, and how did puppetry start for you? Because I know you did all sorts of musical stuff. I don't know, chicken or egg, what came first. When did you first realize that you had the performance or creative makeup that brought you here?
Well, I'll start down. My particular belief is that puppeteers kind of come from two basic categories. They're either guys who couldn't talk without a puppet on their hand from the time they were itty bitty, and it was their outlet, and then performers or artists in other walks of life who kind of find puppetry as the best form of expression for them. So you get some people who don't come to it till much later in life. I'm kind of a category 2. Apparently, I played with my dolls and my toys in a very, character-driven fashion when I was a kid. Like they had voices, and they did things that were about who they were. It wasn't so much things smashing into one another. It was trying to do silly things and make people laugh and do silly voices. I didn't make the correlation, but my maternal grandfather built me a little puppet stage, and I had a bunch of hand puppets, and apparently I don't even remember that I used to play with them that much. I remember the thing folded up in a closet. I don't remember ever using it. That doesn't necessarily mean I didn't. I just don't remember. And then I fell into doing marionettes as a summer job in high school. Literally, my drama coach knew the woman who was doing the social outreach for a local real estate company that was building a mall, and this particular system of malls around the country, the way they did their public outreach in general was there was a marionette theater in the center of the construct of the mall. They would have these shows built that were on cassette tapes. Yes, cassette tapes. That's how old I am. That would travel with the show. You'd rehearse a show for a couple of weeks and then do it, twice on the weekends and once in early evenings for the kids during the summer. And then about 2 weeks later, the new show would show up. You would rehearse it for a couple of weeks while you're doing the other one. Then you pack up, send it to the next place, so that they would just kind of be shipped around the malls, or, one at a time. So everybody had a different show. And I got pretty good at it. I got pretty good at marionettes from my own point of view, but it didn't really grow on me. It didn't feel like an outlet. It just felt like something cool to do. And I enjoyed it, but didn't develop a passion for it. But the notion of puppetry had me kind of finding ways to stick that sort of artistry wherever I could. My father taught collegiate level theater, so my sister and I were always in summer theater programs, and we were in, whatever shows whenever a show needed a kid. Like when they did the original version of To Kill a Mockingbird, wound up being one of the kids on stage and what have you. My whole life, it was just what you did to spend time with Dad. I was going to be a scientist. I was going to be a zoologist. That was my thing until I was like 14. And then when my parents got divorced, I realized in school, the only place that I really felt like was home in the classes was drama class. was hanging around with the artists and the creative folks. And so I shifted. When I was pursuing my undergraduate degree, my dad got a job at Eckerd College in Florida. Went down there after 2 years at Oklahoma State. I transferred, worked at Disney for 6 months on the college program. If you know anybody else who's done the Disney college program, I did get my doctorate. I'm terribly proud of that. I lost it, but yes, that's right, doctorate. You get your master's or your doctorate for those of you who haven't done the Disney college program.
Oh.
Wasn't sure if it was a bad connection.
No,
Like,
the doctorate.
What? Oh, okay.
So that was like a half-hour siesta, or a half-semester siesta, and then jump back into getting the undergraduate degree under my feet in case the performing thing didn't work out. And a friend of the family pointed out a newspaper ad for a guy who had worked in Florida as a local puppeteer for Henson's efforts at doing the first jobs under the contract with Disney, where Disney licensed the use of the characters. So the Muppet 3D, Muppets at Walt Disney World, those specials, and they needed a lot of extra hands. This guy who had been a church puppeteer all his life and built his own puppets got his mind blown with monitor puppetry and its specific skill set, and went home and just started working by himself, trying to get better at manipulating a puppet in front of a camera, and got to a point where he needed people to play with. Put an ad in the paper. Don't want money, can't pay money, but I want to get people together to teach them this with the hopes that maybe someday we could work together as a group. So I started going. There's like 20 people the first night, like 18 the second, 12, dwindled down to like there was 4 of us that just were really jazzed about it. And we were so jazzed about it that we bumped it up to twice a week, and we would try to outdo each other and bring in songs that we had rehearsed lip syncing to and come up with stupid character skits and what have you. And eventually we got a segment through his efforts. We made a music video to kind of sell ourselves, lip syncing to Presley's Blue Suede Shoes. And that opened the door to a 5-minute segment on a local kids show. And at that time, we did the show for they did the show for almost 5 years, but the 2 years that I was involved, we started from the first year winning the Cable Ace Award, Local Programming Cable Ace Award, which I don't know if you guys know what the Cable Ace were, but it was an effort to kind of get local programming into the eye of the larger programming world, competing with the networks, because as cable was coming up, it was challenging to pull people's eyes off the major networks and the things that they were comfortable with to the other things that were around. And the Cable Ace Awards kind of got outside of that sector of the big guys who always kept the public eye on them, and their awards never really trickled out to other folks.
Trickled down.
We're seeing the same.
And was it also a hopefully to promote like for syndication and stuff and getting into the wider markets and all that? Okay.
I'm assuming that's why it was created.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of seeing that same shift with, streaming platforms versus the networks and bigger cable paper networks. But it was similar to that. So the Cable Ace kind of was there to bolster that part of the media that was being consumed. And we won it a couple times in a row. So when I moved to New York, sent the tape of what I had done to the Jim Henson Company, and didn't know that we already kind of had a following. I knew that we won the local Cable Ace Award, which I thought meant we won the Cable Ace Award for Tampa Bay shows down there in Florida. But what I came to find out was we won the specific age range Cable Ace Award for local programming in the United States for 3 years in a row.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't know we had a reputation already. So when I sent my tape,
you're on a lot of people's radars.
Yeah. So when I sent my tape in and somebody finally looked at it, which that's its sort of own story, I was the guy that was on that show. I wasn't just, it wasn't as cold call as I thought it was, which was kind of cool to find out afterwards.
That's cool. That's amazing. I have a question going back to when you were first sort of starting, because you mentioned the camaraderie and enjoying yourself in the drama department in your high school. Can you talk about that leap to then doing these marionette shows in the malls? Because I imagine that was probably it could have been a very rigid thing. If you're not super comfortable with marionettes, you don't, I imagine, get to play too much because you're working to a script. You're not able to do your own dialogue.
It's much more technical. It's not like it's different between being an actor and playing a character versus almost like being a dancer. Again,
Yeah,
very
well, and I guess I'm just thinking, like, if you're enjoying the community aspects of theater and then you go to this puppet thing, and like, was there even a community for you to latch onto there?
At that point, no. There was not an established puppet community, at least where I was. Ironically, though, I was born in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, which there was a huge puppet festival that happens there every year that I've never been to, never seen, never been a part of. But it's really weird because when I say I'm from Tahlequah, to some of the entrenched, theatrical and live puppeteers, like, oh, well, then it totally makes sense. And I'm like, well, no, actually, it doesn't. It's anyway. That because of how I described to you as this woman who's doing outreach, she assumed she needed young people who were good with kids to come in and audition for this thing and wiggle the dollies. I was like the only guy that showed up. All the other ones were like cheerleaders from other school districts who just, I want to pay, I like kids and I want to perform for the kids. I'm being really rude right now and I apologize, but they were very diverse group of people, socio-emotionally, so to speak, and we were from different strata that were involved in putting these shows together. Any artistry was kind of self-imposed. Like, I myself wanted to make sure I was manipulating the thing so that it felt like gravity was actually acting on it and that it was alive and thinking and making choices of movement because it's emotionally wanting to do something and not just have it glide across the stage. And sometimes that was good because sometimes the puppets that showed up were amazing and sometimes they were literally stuffed teddy bears on strings. That is not an exaggeration. There was a variety show version of one of these cassettes that showed up, and we were literally had a parade of about a dozen stuffed bears dancing to Girls Just Want to Have Fun across the stage. And
what artists?
Yeah. Anyway, so there wasn't an established puppeteer community, and to your point, that's one of the things I've always said, Adam, is that I feel like marionetting in general kind of appeals generally, most people who get in touch with it, to a dancer's mindset, a movement-based mindset. And those who really become into the craft of it start eking into the building of character. And especially those that design and build look at it from a character-based point of view at a certain. Well, no, I'm being too specific because I've also known amazing visual artists who create movement of line, and it's not necessarily character based. So
well, it does point out to like those are definitely paths to get there. There's not one path to get there, but definitely like you look at someone like Philip Huber who does have that dancing background and stuff. So it makes a lot of sense how he got to that. And
sure,
and it's the same as some other marionette puppeteers we've talked to. So
sure, and what winds up happening is like any good presentation in front of a consuming audience, you want to take them on a journey, and more often than not, there's a shorthand that's created from the audience. If you can create the archetype of a character for them so that they've got a grounding point when they see something visually and they kind of know where the character is and what it wants almost from the first few moments that they're engaging with it, the storyline can then go in interesting ways and you can take them on a journey more easily because you have established the strength of character. You don't have to start from ground zero teaching them the language of this flitting piece of fabric is representative of a butterfly. It's not an actual butterfly, and you'll see after a few rounds of movement what I'm trying to translate. Whereas if you can come out there with a caricature of a actual being that we can kind of cast in societal strata and who they are, where they are, what might be going on in their brain, you then get to take them on an expressive journey as opposed to having to spend so much time defining your world for them at the onset. So again, in order to create those 3-4 minute segments of storytelling. A lot of the more well-known marionettists, at least in my experience, have a tendency to delve more into the notion of character and creating character through movement versus movement itself. Long-winded again.
No. I just was processing that and wanted to make sure that I didn't necessarily need or have a follow-up question to it.
Sure.
Because no, I think that really describes quite well just what that specific facet of the art form does, and of course the art form as a whole. But yeah, that's great. So then when you're in New York, you find out that people kind of know you or know your work at least. Is that when Bear in the Big Blue House happened, or were there other things that happened before that?
That one, and I've told some of these stories in other places. That one was its own. Bear was my big break. Everything else was just kind of, oh, hey, there's another guy who can do this, give him a little bit of a chance, and then nothing would really ever come of it. Meeting other young puppeteers, I created some relationships and was in their projects that they tried to start out people's pilots and other, one-offs, and got to play a lot. But in terms of really being able to move a career forward, at the time the show Bear in the Big Blue House was being developed, Mitchell Kriegman was under a contract developing shows for Henson, found the treatment for this show in a drawer, and kind of scratched his shins like there can be something here. And he really went in and ripped it up and reorganized things and pushed things in directions, like the scale of the characters and how they related to one another, and created the construct that what eventually became the show. And they shot a test pilot, and even at the time they were casting the show, Henson kind of had their ringers. At that time, the Jim Henson Company was still in charge of all the casting that was going on with Disney's Muppets, and all the casting that was going on with Sesame Street, and their own projects as well. So between the two, technically the three locations, because the Creature Shop in England was a little more vibrant at that time, and LA was on its way to becoming more vibrant, but there was still a very strong base there. New York was kind of where all the Muppet style, classically associated with Muppet style performers, were located, and they had their list of folks. Said, you when you're developing your project, these are the 10 people that you can audition. And Mitchell auditioned them, and a couple of them worked for a couple of characters and some not so much. And he described, he's like, oh, well, try so-and-so again. I'm sure they can give you what you want. Wasn't really comfortable, but opened the doors to the B list. So a few more folks were coming in the doors, and he found a couple of folks. That's kind of how, and Noel would hate the fact that I just said B list in his name, but he knows at the time that's probably the way they looked at it. So that's when they found Noel, and Noel got involved in the pilot. They already had Peter Linz attached. That's also he wasn't quite happy, so he opened the ranks a little bit more, and that's when they found Vicky Eibner, who wound up playing Ojo. And then he was kind of bemoaning at one point with Joey Mazzarino, who helped shoot the pilot, but was not going to be available for the show because he was very much ensconced at Sesame at that time, and the two were going to be shooting at the same time. And he was kind of bemoaning the fact that he couldn't really nail down a couple of the characters, and he was also concerned because they were in a bidding war between Sesame and Bear for Peter at that point. He's like, I don't want to do. And Joey's like, have you tried so-and-so? Yeah. How about so-and-so? Yeah, I don't know. How about Tyler Bunch? Who's that? Tyler Bunch. I don't know that name. Oh, well, then how about I don't know that name. So Joey then started thinking about, in terms of, the people on my level, so to speak. And they got a hold of that list and had another round of auditions 2 weeks before shooting was supposed to start. And I worked my butt off. I was working at that time at the Jekyll and Hyde Club, which is a tourist destination ensconcing atmospheric restaurant where people go in and they're in a world of mad scientists and explorers, and there's characters running around the restaurant interacting with you and your family and doing little shows with electronic puppets on the walls. And that was my sort of day job at the time. And I was up in the booth where we did the puppets, which there were cameras on local areas and cameras on the puppet. And we would speak through a microphone, making the puppet talk and interacting with people every once in a while. And whenever I wasn't on a puppet, I was sitting there with my script, testing voices out on my fellow performers. What do you guys think about this? And, working my audition up. And went in, did my thing. I auditioned for all the smaller characters on the show. And got a call 3 hours later on the bus ride home that they were offering me the part. So that was my quote unquote big break. And I learned very quickly that I sucked compared to Noel McNeil and Peter Lintz and Jim Krupa, who was their support staff and puppeteer. Like my skill set were just not up to par. I got the part, and I was told later on that same season because of the performative choices I made in the audition, the things that I emotionally made the characters do, no one else had brought to the table. Like Treelo, we did the section from, I believe it's the first show, the first episode, where Bear unplugs the tub and the water starts going out, and Treelo starts freaking out that he's going to get sucked down the drain. And Bear's like, no, don't worry about it. It's just the water. You see, the hole's too small. It's just the water. And when Treelo makes the realization, there's no way I would have gotten sucked down the drain. Well, at least that's the realization I had him make. He laughed at himself for making the mistake. It's like, silly me. I can't believe I thought that. Totally emotionally invested at the time. He was freaking out. But then like, oh, wait, I'm not. That was silly. Ha ha. The choice of laughing at himself was what got me the part. It's okay to make the mistake. And apparently no one else had made that choice in auditioning. And it kind of popped for the creator of the show and his associate producer, who basically, as soon as I was done with my audition, he's like, that's the guy, right? Which I didn't know. So my choices as an actor were what gave me the opportunity to have the on-the-job training to become a better puppeteer. And I worked my butt off in that first season to try and catch up. And every moment I wasn't in a scene, I was out on set kind of watching how the other guys were doing it and figuring out what I needed to do to bring my skills up on what they were doing that was different from what I was doing, and what the puppet needed to do in frame to hit the audience as clearly and cleanly as what they were doing. And
what were some of those things that were different? Because you did
Yeah,
describe to us how much experience you had when you were doing it in Florida, and you were already on their radar in some sense. Yeah, what were those? Because the way you're describing it now, it sounds like there's kind of a bigger difference, even though it may have just been like nervousness in your head, or experience-based, professional experience.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any specific examples of those? Maybe techniques or
the biggest thing I can say, well, start off with the general. You know how many people were entertained by TV Funhouse and those puppets that were funny because they were puppets, and they're doing enough movement for you to understand the puppet's intention, but you're very aware, puppet is very much in your head. You're not thinking of them as a character. So I was kind of in that in-between space, in that I was making very clear, very strong performance choices with my vocal interpretation and the juxtaposition of movement versus stillness. It was clear what my characters wanted. The difference was being able to do that same thing without vocalizing. The notion that the specificity of my physical performance was just as communicative and just as clear without having to have the characters speak. And I was roped into having to do that, specifically with Treelo, because that character's part of the overall mix of the show, each character that interacted with Bear was supposed to represent a child at a different stage in socio-emotional development. I think that's the third time I've used that phrase in this interview. That's the word of the day. Please feel free to cheer. The Treelo being the youngest, right at that point where kids are starting to get the handle on language and starting to communicate the way everyone else in the room does, so they can understand a lot more than they can pull out. It's like any of us when we're learning a foreign language can identify with it now. Like there are times when you sure as heck know what that guy said in Spanish, as he was very kind enough to help you off the sidewalk, but you didn't know what to say in return necessarily. So that that idea that you understand a lot more than you can communicate. And Treelo was supposed to be at this place where you could understand the occasional word, but most of it was more about emotional intention than anything you could actually climb onto. I had to get better at the physical demonstration of what Treelo's emotional reality was and what Treelo was trying to communicate, because I didn't have the luxury of the words. And I could see it in my fellow performers, especially, Frank Oz and the art of stillness. The when you weren't moving being just as important as when you were moving, because one of the things as puppeteers we have a tendency to try to figure out, much in the same way a clown does, right? The movement for every bit of emotion, when the stillness is just as important. I mean, and that's just one tiny example of specific manipulative points that I hope highlights the idea of, in now an ideal world, the style of puppetry that I work in, hand and rod style, or hand in mouth and rod style puppetry, is I would want to always get to the point that the television could be on mute and you would still understand what my character was doing and saying. I'm still not there. I like to think that I'm closer, and I like to think it's an art form that you can keep growing in those respects. And there are times when, you are the joke of the moment, and it is more about the over-the-top wild vocal performance or the over-the-top wild physical performance that helps sell the moment. And that's one of the other things of ascertaining when it is your character's job to give focus and it is your character's job to take focus. And hopefully honing that with the collaboration with the director and the other performers of how to make that happen. So you're almost giving the audience the gift of where their attention's supposed to be, as opposed to trying to always be alive and active. That's not always necessarily the goal. And again, it depends on what you're working on, depends on whether it's to teach kids something or just entertain people or whatever. But all those ingredients, I was a capable performer. I had strong character choices. I could interpret the text well. I knew where all the funny points were. But in terms of being able to support all of that with the specificity of the techniques of puppetry, I was not there. And try to get there still as much as I can.
Yeah. Well, and to your point about, wanting to be able to say things just as much from a movement standpoint versus the vocal, some of that ends up depending on the script, right? Because
sure.
if you are just given blocks and blocks of text, it's like I have no other job but then to say the words that are on this page. But that's really interesting, especially with a character like Treelo, who, again, as you said, didn't always, there were not often words that you'd recognize coming out of their mouth.
And that was one of the things that I, it was a collaboration, and we're getting mired too much into the specificity of Treelo, but one of the things that wound up happening over those first seasons was figuring out with the writers what they wanted Treelo to be saying, because sometimes they would write the gobbledygook and sometimes they would write a sentence. And I basically said, okay, we need to come up with a shorthand. You need to underline the word that you want to hear, because there are so many ways I can interpret this sentence. I want you to underline the one or two words you need to be discernible, so that I can just screw around with the rest of it, so that I was doing what I felt was appropriate for the character, but not hopefully ignoring what the writer's intents were.
Sure. That's great. That reminds me of when they were writing the movie WALL-E over at Pixar, which, that I think 2/3 of it didn't have any dialogue
at all. It's a thin script.
Yeah. No, but it wasn't, because they actually wrote exactly what they wanted.
The movement.
No. They wrote dialogue for those characters. for Eve
They just
and Wally.
muted dialogue. Oh, wow.
And then they gave that to the storyboard animators and said, okay, now make this happen with the movement and with beeps and stuff too. But they wanted that to be able to read completely without, anything. And that kind of reminds me, like you were saying, of, underline the word that you want to hear.
Sure.
That's great. I did want to talk, and we'll move on. This is kind of just a general question about auditions. But you were saying, you really wanted to think about what that character's, what a character, the different traits that it might have, and really thinking about how it would respond in emotions and stuff based on what they give you. The question that I'm maybe not going to ask the right way, but I'd love to talk about, is that a lot of times when you go into an audition, you're not given the final version of a puppet. You're maybe not even given a puppet that looks anything like what the final puppet will look like, or what matches with the character. And I know,
and sometimes they don't even know exactly what they want, but they know when they see it.
So
kind of a thing.
yeah. So how do you maneuver in an instance where, if you're watching the character on the screen, you're maybe trying to match the look of the puppet they hand you, but in your mind you need to think, oh, I need to be matching this other thing that's down the road. And also then maybe thinking about the producers who are going to look and say, well, he doesn't match that puppet. Or like, can you talk about navigating that situation? I don't know if any of that's making sense, but
It is.
yeah.
In my experience, it's not too consistently an issue that the individuals doing the hiring don't have at least one puppet-informed person in the room. I'm not saying it's impossible, but and for those of you who are creating your shows, when you audition people, please make sure there's at least one puppet-informed person in the room. So that having been said, I have not experienced chatter about someone being considered less because what they were doing didn't match the puppet on screen. However, I have heard that about people who didn't match the puppet in the text, the character in the text. So I'm going to half answer your question in that, well, it's twofold. There is, don't only read your lines. Never only read your lines. If at all possible, if they only send you sides for your character, you could ask them to send sides for other characters so you could get more of a sensibility of how the writers are seeing things. You get more of an idea of how your character is different from the other characters and how the other characters speak, so that you can push whatever differences can be highlighted, so that your character's form of communicating and how it differs and how it is the same as the other characters that it will be associating with if you're not fortunate enough to have a dialogue scene. And additionally, the other characters may say things about your character that they haven't thought to put in the descriptions, or something that one of the other characters said about your character is that it may cue something to you like, oh, that's like this other person that I know, and I would like to bring that trait into this because it makes that other character react in this way. I bring that in so that I spur that reaction. Or you're going to get, the more information you can get about their project, the better off you are. And the more you're looking at it through the specific lens of the character that you're auditioning for, and can mine, again, that specificity to your audition, the better. So that's point number one. Point number two is that we all have a tendency to worry about what it is they want to hear, like even by the way you formed the question.
Yeah.
And bleep me if you got to, but that is not what makes you a unique performer, that makes you a panderer. If you go in thinking, oh, well, I think they want to hear this, everybody, the likelihood that all intelligent performers are going to approach this information and go, oh, I think they're looking for a character like blah, blah, blah. And everybody kind of goes in doing the same thing. It's not that you want to stand out for the sake of standing out. It's that you want to stand out by bringing what's unique to you to the table. What unique aspect would you bring to this character that gives everything they're asking for within the framework of your experience and your specific skill set, and trying to hone the things unique to you and bring them into the room. So for me, it always starts on the page first. In an audition, it starts on the page first. If you're bringing in things as a puppet creator and saying, look at these things I designed, it makes total sense to worry about what the puppet looks like. But often contradiction can be hilarious. And if the character that they want doesn't really sound or feel like anything like the puppet that they've handed you to audition with, say it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know,
Right.
I slept really well, so you can't see my wrinkles today, but trust me, I usually look really old or whatever. You know, the notion that if it feels uncomfortable to you in the room, my take is, you know, call it out. Like, everybody knows it. Ignoring it's the worst thing that you can do. So if it really, as a performer, bugs you that the puppet doesn't really look like the character that you're auditioning for, you know, make that part of your opening spiel, whatever, you know, picture, if you will, you know, or whatever, who knows. But
Yeah.
I try to figure out ways to make whatever obstacles become assets. Whatever thing you think is going to stop your creativity or halt their interpreting you being the best person for the job, figure out a way to turn it into an asset. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And I'm thinking specifically, and part of where this question even came from, it's basically therapy for me. No, no, because I did an audition years back. We were at the same one for a Disney project at Henson years back, and I had prepared, because they sent you what the character was supposed to look like, and I had prepared a voice in my head that I was like, this was going to fit great for this drawing that they gave you. And then it ended up being a different, you know, thing in the room.
Right.
And I found myself, as I'm watching the monitor, correcting the voice that I had come up with ahead of time with the character that was there. And I was fully aware of it as the moment was happening, but I went from what I had prepared to matching it to this like green thing that is on my arm. Obviously didn't get the part. I think you actually did. No. This is not in any way. It's not. But it's a legitimate question that I was curious if that, you know, if you find yourself doing. You obviously don't find yourself doing that.
I'm glad we're talking about this, because auditioning is something that everyone always wonders about, but not everyone talks about. And you know, we've both auditioned for tons of things over the years, and obviously you have too. I think you're a perfect person to talk about this, because at the end of the day, I feel like I could answer the question myself, is like, at the end of the day, they just kind of want to get to know you and how you perform. It's like, as long as you are being an honest portrayal of a character and how flexible you are, they can say like that there's something to work with there. You
Right.
know, they don't necessarily need that picture perfect thing right away, you know?
Right.
So I guess one thing I might ask is, because I think all the advice you've given us has been so wonderful, but it's one of those things that, and I've been there myself in auditions, it's like, you go in there, okay, just be yourself, do this, and then like sometimes you accidentally deliver that canned thing that you didn't expect to, you
Right.
know? Is there any tip that maybe you have, and just I don't know, clearing your head, focusing on what you're really trying to deliver and being the sincere you, rather, again, like you said, not being what you think they want them to be. Because again, at the end of the day, I think everyone knows that that's what you're supposed to do, but like,
Yeah, once
sometimes
you're in
it's
that
hard.
moment,
Sometimes it's so hard in that moment. You just get all the chills and the jitters and the yeah.
Well, I'm going to start off answering that question with ultimately what sounds like a self-aggrandizing pat on my own back. One of the only compliments that I've actually heard directly from the Henson Company or Henson family at large, and I know they love me and appreciate my talents. I just think it's interesting that the only third-party compliment that I've gotten is from Lisa Henson saying, "Man, Tyler Bunch just really knows how to audition." Now, that could be a backhanded compliment in that he auditions really well, and then we give him the part, and he totally sucks.
You just can't deliver.
The first ingredient is getting it out of your head that the people on the other side of the table are looking for what you're doing wrong. No one ever goes into an audition on the other side of the table going, "Wow, I hope a lot of people suck today. I hope nobody's good. I hope nobody is exactly what we're looking for." Like, so they have a goal set too. They want you to be perfect for them. They want you to surprise the crap out of them and do things they weren't expecting and go, "Oh, wow, I didn't know this person would be this good. Cool." Like, so right off the bat, no one in that room is rooting for you to blow it.
Yeah.
And it sounds like such a simple thing to say, but we all go in worried about the mistakes we're going to make. And that's, no one in the room, except for you, is thinking that. No one in the room is going, "Okay, here's that part where everybody's been screwing up. Let's see if they do it too." Like, that's not, I mean, it doesn't even make sense. Like, if you really put yourself in those shoes, it doesn't make any sense for you to be thinking that way.
Yeah.
So
right.
That's number one. Everybody in the room is rooting for you to do a good job, period. And then number two is your job is the audition. Say that again. Your job is the audition. Getting the part is kind of more like icing on the cake. Your job is to go in there and present the best aspects of you in regard to the material that they've asked you to showcase into that room. You're supposed to be auditioning. That's the only thing you focus on for the day. And if it's going to stress you out to get to that audition, figure out a way to keep that from happening. Figure out a way that, just like you like to be, if you the kind of person likes to be early for work, figure out a way to be early to the audition. If they said, I personally don't like to walk into the room or the building until 15 minutes. Like 15 minutes is the earliest I want to show up into the space and sign up on the sheet or whatever the case may be. But, if you need to get to the area sooner, like if you thought of the breakfast food that you wanted to have that day, get it to go and have it, in the car or on the stoop outside in front of the building so that you're there and relaxed and going over. If it's stressful for you to get there, you're going to carry that in. And there's nothing you can do about that. So why complicate it for you in that way? So right off the bat, the main three ingredients to me are: no one wants you to suck. Your job is to be uniquely you and figure out a way to make it easy for yourself. It sounds unbelievably simple, but just those mind flips, it has ultimately after that, it has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
You can't change the situation. You can't change their mind. There's only two conditions under which you get employed. You either are exactly what they wanted from the moment you open your mouth in the room, or you change their mind about what they thought they wanted. That's it. So you can't control either one of those things. It is impossible for you to control. You can afterwards, I wish I had come up with that one joke, but you didn't. Okay, c'est la vie. Moving on. And for instance, I have my career as an actor as well. If my entire income were based on my career as an actor, I would not be an actor. The work is so hard. I just booked a role on High Maintenance. I don't know if you've seen High Maintenance on HBO. It's a really fun show. You should watch it. I hadn't watched it before I got a role on it. It's really great storytelling, very adult storytelling, but really fun. And now that I've started watching it, I have seen so many of my friends and associates on that show because of the way the show works. There's new characters every every episode. It's not really a through line storyline, or at least it's a very loose through line storyline. And the whole notion of the main character is that he's consistently bumping up against different people in the world, and you follow their lives more than his. And then every once in a while you trail to a storyline about his life, but then you go back into the people that he's interacting with very briefly. He's in the scene, and then you're off on their world, their journey. So a lot of working actors in New York have been on that show. They've had their one episode thing, their 3-line thing. Maybe they've had a character that's got a lot of screen time.
It's like a Law and Order type thing.
Basically.
Yeah.
So it's like a dramedy Law and Order. All of those people got an amazing part on a really cool show, and it's not a career, it's a job. It's it's a gig.
It's a gig.
Yeah, it's another thing for your reel. And in the true interpretation of our efforts as performing artists is, unless you are creating your own work, that's your lifestyle. You're consistently auditioning, you getting the one gig, and then kind of maneuvering your world until you get the next one, until the one big thing comes along. So putting all of your hopes and dreams into the outcome of the audition is not really being true to what you're doing. Just by sheer percentages, the likelihood that you're going to get every job is not really that strong, especially in the puppeteer world, because we don't have the luxury of being the marketable image in frame. Like we don't get to market ourselves like a television star, Fleshy would, because our presence in the product is not necessarily going to bring eyes on screen. So it's literally what we have to bring to the table. You either want it or you don't. You don't want it? Okay, maybe I'll be good for the next one. Bye-bye. And that's the other thing too, is deciding, just literally deciding that rejection is not that big of a deal. Which that's hard.
You got to grow some thicker skin and stuff too. And that's why one more recommendation I would give as well is just audition for everything you can, because there's no other. I mean, you can prep as much as you can, but there's nothing like actually doing it, and you learn something from every single one that you do as well. Definitely.
And how do I say this? The atmosphere around auditions in general is, whenever I make a joke in a waiting room, I see the palpable reaction of everybody going, oh. Like you walk into a silent waiting room and everybody's sitting around doing a thing, and then just the one offhanded joke that I either make about my own appearance or, wow, red ink. Jeez, we're signing in blood today, or whatever it is. Like, you see everybody just kind of, oh, okay. Right, I'm human. Yeah. I'm a human. I'm a human being. And I almost feel sorry for everybody else in the room in that moment, because I was like, what was going on in your head that just my silly little, joke has that much of a reaction? It is our human tendency to be all up in it and worried about that, worried about the rejection. And my agent, my Fleshy agents, Clear Talent Group, whenever we talk about me going to casting directors, and I go, oh, I've got this thing, can we change the time or whatever? It's like, yeah, I'm sure they'll be flexible. They're fans. And I kind of go, hold on a second. They're fans. Even though this person, this producer, this casting director may make the realization that you're not right, or for whatever reason they sent you up the food chain, you wound up being not right, it doesn't mean that they have any less of an appreciation for your skill set and what you brought into the room. And they may actually still have you in the back of their mind for other things. To your point, Adam, the audition isn't necessarily about that job. So going to every audition isn't necessarily about getting the specific job. It's about getting your art out there and being exposed to things. There's a movie that whenever I'm talking to people, and I talk about it way too much, it's a documentary that was done years ago called That Guy Who Was in That Thing. And that is literally the name of the movie, that guy who was in that thing, because they interviewed 12 actors who you would swear you saw them in everything in the 80s and 90s. And they're like,
I've seen
yeah, I
that.
think I actually saw that too.
It was on
Yeah.
Netflix,
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah,
recently,
I remember
at
that.
some
you know,
point. It was great.
that guy who was in that thing. So they literally kind of interview them. They follow a couple of them on some of their daily paths, and you learn what it's like, at least at that time, to be a working actor at a certain level in LA. And I've watched it all the way through at least 3 times. I recommend it to everybody. It's a little dated in terms of the specificity of their world, and whether or not you're aware of, their careers. But in terms of the truisms, there are little gems that it's simultaneously inspiring and depressing, of like making the realization of, okay, this is what it's really like. Yes, there are those lottery winners who get the awesome gigs that have them in the public eye for a while, but as far as like the drudgery of making the artistry work, and it sounds like it wouldn't apply, but it really does apply to any form of freelance artistry. And then about, getting off your butt and the notion of showcasing your talent being your job, the notion of like going to that interview, taking your portfolio, doing the audition, whatever it is, that is the job to keep the freelance artistry alive. Because we grew up with people who went on an interview and then had jobs for 4, 6, 20, 25, 30 years from the one interview. Our job as freelance artists is to present our artistry hundreds of times in a given year. We're going to auditions or meetings for short-term jobs or installations or, specific video projects or whatever it is. So we're consistently out there presenting ourselves. So the notion that they interview for a job, we interview for a living, and sometimes we get the jobs. And again, it sounds like such, but just clicking your mind into that viewpoint, getting that mindset is,
Right.
To me at least, it makes the difference. Because, like I started to say, as an actor, I've had some cool, high visibility stuff, but you look at my tax returns and don't mean diddly crap. It's nothing. And that's one of the discussions that I have with folks about, how our world is transitioning into the new media realm and streaming, and how this kind of stuff is monetized as it's being figured out. It's a half step back, hopefully to take 2 steps forward, in that there might be more work available, but it's taking up more of your time to do work that doesn't necessarily recompense you to the degree that you would hope. And at a time in our social strata and economic actual reality of existence, that it's that much harder to survive nowadays. Minimum wages and what have you, and cost of living. I could, when I got to the city in the 90s, I could still survive on a part-time job with roommates. It was possible. I don't know anybody who doesn't have a docent, an unusual situation, money from mom and dad, a ridiculous deal because their family owns an apartment or whatever. I don't know anybody in the tri-state area, at least, that can survive on a part-time job and still pursue their artistry to the level they need to in order to advance it. And I think that's speaking more about our general economic situation as anything else. I'd love to be proven wrong. I hope there's some part of the country where it still happens. But even my understanding of those folks who live like in Austin, it's a burgeoning artistic scene. Atlanta's getting a lot more film and TV work, but I don't know anybody who doesn't have some sort of grounding situation economically that allows them to play in the world. Or they're nose to the grindstone, taking every little tiny thing that comes along, or both. So it's a different reality nowadays, I think, than when I started. but the truisms are the same, and bring it back to you have to audition for everything you possibly can because you don't know what it's going to lead to. You don't know what paths may be opening to you because of that audition. I auditioned for Tinfoil Kevin in The Tick. I don't know if you guys watched The Tick on Amazon, but Amazon Prime. Pardon me. There's a character that's consistently in a lot of the episodes through the seasons, who's theoretically a homeless guy, and I auditioned for him on the last day, a few people before the guy who actually got the part. And 3 days later, knowing I didn't get the part, I got a call from the casting director saying, "Hey, Ben's created this new character. It's supposed to shoot this week." Ben Eglin being the creator of the show. Well, I can call him Ben because I've met him since. They wrote this new character. She didn't have time to audition, so she's like, "I'm going to send your tape in auditioning for Tinfoil with Kevin for this role. It's between you and 3 other guys. I'll let you know." Hour and a half later, "Okay, never mind. It's just your tape, but we have to send it in and get approval from network folks, the producers. So I'll let you know." Then 2 hours later, "Okay, you got the part. You shoot in 2 days. Come in for costumes tomorrow."
Wow.
Yeah. And that happens in puppetry all the time, too. Like, maybe you audition for this, and if you didn't get it, they have another project coming out in 2 years. Like, hey, remember that guy? Let's at least call him in, you know? And even, this whole story kind of started off of Joey mentioning your name, which I'm sure that even came from, I'm assuming him seeing you in audition or even working with you on something. So, I mean, it's all a testament to that.
It's all, and unfortunately, it circles back to, with jobs, it's kind of catch can with the individual job. With careers, it really is about who you know and who you work with and who you want to keep working with and who your consistent clients are, whatever the case is.
And those people will potentially be at any audition you go to, which is why you got to follow a lot of this kind of advice of representing yourself honestly and trying to be prepared. Yeah. Putting yourself into it, yeah,
and also not being afraid to showcase. Like, there's one of the itches in the back of my head, and again, we're going back to I have more auditions for fleshy on camera work than I do for puppetry. The puppetry auditions don't come along that often. There's more fleshy work to be had. So there's this movie that never happened that I auditioned for. Eventually, I auditioned for the director, didn't get the part, but and then the movie wound up getting canceled because Morgan Freeman broke his leg. But at the time, I was auditioning for this role, and it made sense to me. It was a period piece, a ship going across the Atlantic, and I said it would make a lot more sense if I did this with an accent. Should I do an accent? And I literally saw the casting director kind of, "Oh, no." And she shivered. And it's one of those things where I walked out going, why the hell did she do that? What brought that reaction? And then I realized how many people honestly think they can do an accent that actually can't do an accent. And how many actors have, brought it in there and I thought I would do this for you, and
I did today.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Mary Poppins. So the stupid me, what truly annoyed me, Adam and Cammy, said, if I had just gone in and just done it, right? If I just gone in and say, "Hey, here's the accent, lovely to meet you," just done the whole audition this way and let it come out and she heard it and whatever and we were done with the audition and then I'd said, "By the way, if you want to hear a different accent, I can do that for you too because I'm actually from Oklahoma." Rather than asking permission, like,
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I've always done since. Like, I want to be respectful of their time, and I don't want to make them have to do it again. But I always do the first take the way I want to do it. Now, even if I could see on the page that they asked for something, I go, "Ooh, I don't know if that's right. I could do that, but really? All right, whatever." I do that the second time. I'll do that if they correct me. My first take is what I want to do. This is my audition. This is my time. This is what I want to show you. Not, "Here's what I think you want." It's, "Here's what I got." Yeah. Now
Yeah.
direct me and tell me you want something different.
And I bet you a bunch of people might hear this and think, "Oh, that's not right," because if they know what they want, they know what you want. But one thing I'd say to that is casting is half of directing, and that's why you cast certain people to see what they can bring to the table as well. And I think that's really great advice about doing your take first.
I mean, and don't be a jerk and say they
Oh,
think
of
they want this to
course,
be
of
an
course.
old man
That's
with
my
a
way.
Yeah, right. And be sensible to the writers had an intent, and if you're going to go completely in another direction that takes it away from the basic intent of the part and the show, yeah, I mean, that's you're not being a good artist in that instance. But if you have like shades of something that vary from what it feels like they're asking for, just try it. The worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to say, okay, well, thanks, bye. But more likely what's going to happen is like, okay, that was really cute. Now, if you could do what's on the page or what we asked, we'd really appreciate that. Because chances are, if you have enough of an artistic sensibility to carry it off and to do it well, they're going to see that you're capable. And they're just going to say, okay, try it that way.
And one more thing I'd add to that, too, is make sure you're adding something to it. Because I know a lot of people like changing things or just doing things different just to be different. And like, as long as you think you're interpreting in a way that's elevating what's on the paper, then do it. If you, I'm sure even you yourself, if what you read seemed perfect and is what you would have done anyway, then you probably do just go with that take first.
Definitely. And well, that's funny too, is like this part that I'm going to be doing on High Maintenance. It's a nothing little 3-line scene. It's just a transitional whatever. It doesn't mean anything. But when I went in, the casting director, after we did it once, he's like, okay, so now just kind of play and just, kind of do it in your own words. And I really wrestled with it because it's a 3-line scene. It's pretty cut short. Like there's not much else you can do than what's there. So I wish I'd have thought to ask the question in the moment. I didn't. And I was like, are you saying you're cool with me adding content? Are you saying you want me to extemporize and pull this up and add more to it? Or are you saying pick different words to say the same exact thing? Because honestly, I don't know if I would say this any different. And I didn't really, because there wasn't really another way to say it. I could have improvised till the cows come home on the subject and as if I was in the character in the moment, as if our conversation kept going. But that's another thing, too, being sensitive to the fact that I'm auditioning for a role that I know is 3 lines, a third of a page, 15 to 20 seconds of content in the show. And for me to stretch it either shows insensitivity on my part, unless it's being asked of me. And again, I didn't think in the moment to ask the question. I just was wrestling with, I don't know how to say that differently. Okay, And again, I got the part anyway, but lucky me.
Yeah.
Being cognizant of the fact that everybody, again, in the room wants you to do well. So I would think at least questions are acceptable as long as it doesn't feel like you're, there are those stupid questions like, I completely saw a completely different character in this content, and I'd be happy to show that to you, but are you sure this is exactly what you want? You know what I mean? Like asking questions in a kind and giving exchange way. Yeah.
Great. Love that.
Oh, jeez.
So, I mean, this has been an incredible conversation about, auditioning, and I'm sure everybody who listens to it is really going to appreciate
A lot of value.
everything you've said. I realize we haven't talked a ton about puppetry necessarily, which is fine. Well, I think, like I said, I think this is great.
Well, this is the stuff you need to know before you get to do the
Exactly.
puppetry.
Well, and that's
So I think
that's the
this is
thing though too,
important.
is that I've tried to point this out to people that I have treated my puppetry career more like one treats an acting career or other performative career. There are so many talented folks like you guys, who design and build your own work and create your own work. And hats off to you. I wish I did more of that kind of thing. I tried to keep the 3 balls of an acting career, a puppeteering career, and a voiceover career going, and spending my time doing the other 2 versus creating my own work as a puppeteer was just what I felt my skill set lent itself more toward. So I know that some of this information won't even be relevant to a lot of folks who do create their own work. But at the same time, when you are getting out of the realm of just 1 or 2-hander things and you do need to bring other people on board, being aware of what their mindsets are when they come in to audition for you and they come in to do other things for you, and how nerve-wracking it is, and how, just the smallest word from the other side of the table about, how well it's going, or giving them an opportunity to do something again if you see that they're nervous, give them in a second to, even the gift of saying, you know what, I can tell you're really fed up, and I'm confident you want to do better right now, so you want to go out and gather your urn, get some water on your face, we'll see somebody else, you can come back in, whatever it is, like giving people the room to get that crap out of their system, because there are some amazingly talented folks that I know that are horrible at auditioning.
Yeah.
Just can't get past the human emotional conflict of displaying their wares in that way, and it sucks, because really talented people that I know would do fantastic work if given the opportunity, but they can't get out of their own heads enough to show that to people. So auditioning sucks.
Yeah.
Well, and
it's a separate
think
skill.
It is a separate skill. And the other thing I was going to say, that other people who maybe aren't as focused on the performance element, they're maybe in another realm of the puppetry world, just to hear your approach to just that relentless grind of like making sure you're doing it and putting out work. If you're applying for grant applications, if you're trying to find spaces to work in, or it's helpful to hear just how driven someone like you is, and just how inspirational that could be. I think has been great to hear. But I wasn't sure if there was, as you've said, you've been on all sorts of different podcasts and you share different stories and stuff. Is there ever a story that like you haven't been prompted to tell, that you're like, really, I'd love to talk about this time with, when I was doing Thog, or, no one ever asked me about Ubi or something that you just like, I'd love to just like share this with people. So it's
a reason
out there.
no one ever asks about Ubi. No, I'm just kidding.
Grandpoo.
No, it's funny because puppeteers are in such a weird place, and I've been lucky enough to be. I've been, again, the guy on that B or C list for a lot of really amazing things for a very long time, and I've eked out a career, oddly never really having a lead character in a big project. I mean, if you think about it, having the central or titular character in anything has not happened for me. Well, with the exception of another podcast I'm doing, Dr. Sprague, pet psychiatrist. Look for it on my Facebook page. And being able to flit up against and learn from and soak up information from the top people who work in this specific medium. I have been, for lack of a better term, exposed to the best people on the planet, in what we do, and learning from them. So one of the stories that I've told people before, and it's letting a cat out of the bag for Bill Beretta. And I'm sorry, Bill, if you were going to try and patent this, but when I got asked to go up and be part of the crew for Muppets Wizard of Oz in Vancouver, I was kind of new to the scene. It was when things were uncomfortable because the transition was happening with Disney, and there were these separate auditions that Disney had for some of the main characters, workshops that were kind of done somewhat unintentionally and not as informed with the main cast members as they would have preferred. So they were uncomfortable working with some of the folks who had taken advantage of those audition opportunities until things were sussed out and figured out. And so some new folks got pulled into the crew, or some folks who hadn't been part of those workshops. And I got asked to go up, and we had sort of a puppeteer character tete-a-tete, if you will, a workshop of its own set there in Vancouver a week before we were shooting, where all the main characters were on a table, and Bill Beretta, who had worked himself into being the puppet captain, and rightfully so, wanted to get familiar with what some of us were were bringing, and so had us pick up some of the major characters just to see if we had the movements. We were allowed to sort of approximate the voices so that he could see who, for those characters especially that were double cast, had the chops to enact the characters that weren't the primary members of the scene when someone else needed to be holding them up in the background, so that they would move and relate to the other characters in the character-specific way that the original performers had brought to each of those unique performances. And there was Johnny Fiamma on the table, and I was like, "Oh God, I love Johnny Fiamma. He's hilarious." And I picked up the puppet, and Johnny's got this amazing subtle, thing with his mouth, and "Hey man, Sal, would you hand the whole thing?" I picked him up, and I was like, and on camera, I couldn't make the movements small. I couldn't do it. I was like, every time I tried to do what I thought was a cool thing for Johnny, and it looked like I was a completely different puppeteer, a completely different human. Like a kid put the puppet on, and I couldn't do any of the isms of Johnny. And I was like, what happened? I'm having an aneurysm. I'm having a stroke. My puppeteering career is over. So I just kind of put him down and went to a different character, and it freaked me out for a little while, because by this point, again, I'd done 4 seasons as a bear, and I'd really worked myself up to finding the subtle stuff. We had started doing other shows for Mitchell Kriegman, so we had the Book of Pooh series going on, and I had done some really intense work on honing my skill set so that I could emulate and bring even small performances to puppetry, and I couldn't make it happen, and it freaked me out. About the time I was letting it go, and by the way, that's the one movie that I performed Janice in, also doing the voice, and they won't let me do her anymore, but not because I sucked that horribly. It's because obviously the character has been assigned, and rightfully so, to David. I was watching Ricky Boyd speaking with Bill Beretta about Scooter, because Ricky's a left-handed puppeteer, and he was trying to figure out how to make the puppet work for him, because he was having issues making this puppet that was built for a right-handed performer work for certain shots. And Bill was speaking to him, and he was saying you should probably go in and get them to put in some sort of thumb cup or something on the other side, because that way it won't interfere with this. And I looked down at his hand, and do you see what I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
While he was talking to him, this is what he was doing. So he's talking to him, and he's moving just this digit. And my brain went and slapped back to my hand being in Johnny Fiamma. He has a thumb cup in that puppet, and the palate is effectively split. There's a seam, if you will, in the hard palate in the bottom jaw of the character, so that Bill can move just the lower lip, just this tiny bit, and the whole line does that in just the most subtle way. Now, if you try to do that subtle thing from back here, because it's hinging back here, the whole jaw does that. So I was trying to do these subtle movements, and the whole mouth was moving. But then he's got this sort of isolated lip that he has built into the character so that he can do these tiny performances with this joint. I call that the Beretta flick. I have not yet been able to indoctrinate it into any puppet myself, but now that I paid attention, there's been a couple of characters that he's had designed for himself where he has that secondary palette seam hinge created so that he's got 2 levels of performance out of the 1 digit. Come on, how cool is that?
That's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It really blew my brain up.
I think sometimes people don't quite consider all of the innards. I mean, that of a puppet tool, and you end up realizing like just how intricate they could be, and it's wild to think of you having to be in your own head about, what was I doing wrong, and then all of a sudden there's that light bulb moment. Really, really cool. Yeah. So as we begin to wrap up, it's been so great talking to you. As you know, the name of the show, Puppeteers. We always ask people if they have a fun story that they like sharing, that of something that didn't go right at the time. There's the swag. Puppeteers.com/swag.
Link down below.
Yeah. Puppeteers, get it now. Anyhow, but is there a moment that of something not going right on a set or an environment that really had you wanting to pull your hair out at the time, but now looking back on it, you've got some hindsight and could kind of laugh and enjoy it and share a good puppeteer moment? So that Johnny one was very good.
I mean,
frame it in this ending segment.
Maybe just back up and make that the answer to the other question.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there are a couple. There aren't a lot of them that stand out to me right now, because this is a refrain that I try to share with other performers who come in with, we're an ensemble working together on a certain project, which typically any cast of puppeteers winds up having to be, and we're all there in support of one another and making sure that everyone's hopefully getting what they want out of the scene in respect of all the other creative ingredients that have to come in. The initial writing and the reason that we're even there, because these amazing stories that these writers are telling, that are brought down to the specificity of the scene or the episode, or the scene of the episode, and the directors, the set deck folks, the designers of said sets, the lighting designers, the camera operators and their framing, and director of photography if you're lucky enough to have one. If there's multiple cameras, the guys, the AD that's switching cameras, the actual technician who may be pushing the buttons. If there's on-frame effects that are happening while you're shooting because it's something you need to react to, so there are the effects guys putting those on. There are the producers in the background that are trying to make sure whatever impact needs to happen. So there's so many minds happening that the only time anybody is focused only on one of those people's jobs is when the cameras are rolling and it's us, and everybody's focus is on us and whether or not we're doing our job right. Everybody else can kind of, in the background, get their job and tweak it or whatever. And then all of a sudden, everybody's focus is on our job in the frame, in respect of the costumes and the set decoration and getting the words right and whether or not we're moving the way the director told us to move, and da-da-da. So everybody's watching us get it wrong or get it right. And for a lot of people, the only way that you can kind of get that pressure off of yourself is to focus on the thing you want to do and how you want to get through the scene and the things you want to say in respect of all that other stuff. So when it doesn't happen exactly the way that you want it to, often artists will just get heartbroken of like, we can't do another take, we have to move on. And it's like, but that's not what I wanted to do. I made this mistake, or I was trying to do this and it didn't come off that way. And a refrain I find myself having to say in those instances is, it's not theater, it's not rehearsed. We very rarely get the chance to do anything more than, 2, 3 times, 7 if you're ridiculously unlucky because something else has gone wrong. And if you're doing it 7 times because of something you did, your job's probably not going to last that much longer. Yeah. Don't look at what you wanted to happen. Look at what happened. So ultimately, in answer to your question, was there anything that went wrong that had your hair you're tearing your own hair out? I try not to look at it as that wasn't what I wanted. I look at it as, okay, let's see what happened. Does it work? Can it work in the way that it happened? Is anything egregious? And, there are times I go, you know what, guys, the way that I just said that last line, it sounds like I'm talking about the person who isn't the scene anymore. So we can either loop it or we should probably do it again. I don't look at it as, I really wanted to flip his finger on with the teacup on that one word and I didn't get that. Can we do it again, please? It can't be about you as the individual performer in that moment. It has to be about, did everyone's effort make that original text do what it's supposed to do? Then let's move on. And I'm not going to...
How are you best serving the show?
Exactly, yeah. And the moment, and the team. And, there are hindsight things that, as I have been growing as an artist and my communication skills and whether or not, I behaved the right way on a set, that, there are cringeworthy moments. There are things that I wish I hadn't said or things I wish I hadn't done. But at the same time, I had to make those mistakes to learn. And I'd like to think the person that I am on a set now that is informed by all of those is somebody people want to play with, want to be with on a set.
That's perfect.
Yeah,
That's beautiful.
I think
Wow.
so. Yeah.
Wow. Now, also, is there any way? What's the best way for people to follow your work? Any websites?
I
Instagram?
finally joined Instagram last
Woohoo,
week,
welcome.
2 weeks ago.
Perfect time.
Tyler the Bunch. And that's the only place that I'm consistently doing it. I mean, I've been really remiss in the whole website thing. I hadn't heard that for anyone it had paid off for them as a performing artist, so it hadn't been a drive for me to do that kind of thing. But I'll get better at it. But yeah, Tyler the Bunch Instagram, at Tyler_Bunch on Twitter, and the old Facebook page, which I
Wonderful.
think my head popping out of Oscar's trash can. There are a couple more Tyler Bunches out there. One's like a rapper and one's like a surfer, but I don't think any of them have the weird beard popping out of Oscar's trash can, so you should be able to find me.
Sounds
And you're
good.
also a rapping surfer.
There
so
is that.
Yeah.
Yeah, character motivation. Yeah.
Right.
Cool. Wonderful. Well, again, it's been so wonderful to have you on. We're definitely going to have you on again in the future to get the rest of the story. But again, thank you for your time.
I'm happy to come back.
We'd
Wonderful.
love talking to you. So
All right. Thanks
thank
a
you
lot.
so much, Tyler.
Sure.
Next time.
Woohoo!
All right. Bye.
Cool. Today.
Yeah, exactly.